Now, let's kick the week off with something very, very special. We're going to speak to Lee Anderson, Conservative MP for Ashfield, who we haven't spoken to for quite some time. Lee, a very good morning to you. Welcome back.
Yeah, good morning, Mike. It's good to be back on the home of common sense. Let's have some common sense for the next 10 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's keep that common sense going all week, quite frankly, Lee. I mean, there's a lot of things to be said for what's been going on since you and I last spoke. Obviously, we're seeing, and we've been talking about this a lot here at talkRADIO, the problem for children, the problem for parents, the problem for schools. You know, we're now beginning to see what real damage is being done by keeping the schools closed. What do you think we can do to put enough pressure on the government to try and get them to reopen them?
Well, I mean, the good news is now government have sort of made a commitment to get children back in March. There's a lot of us in Parliament, to be honest with you, Mike, really pushing for this. It's important that we must remember that it's not only the education for our children, it's the mental health bit, it's the well-being. It's all part of growing up. Now, I'm a little bit fed up that our kids are being locked away at home. They're not learning about the dangers and risks that growing up is part of. You know, I go back to my childhood growing up, playing football, climbing trees, getting in trouble, pinching apples, that sort of stuff. You know, a child's life is full of risks and dangers. And we're running the risk of bringing our children up in a sterile society at the moment. And that doesn't bear well for when they grow up and become adults and enter the workplace. We're protecting them far too much. They're not stupid, our kids. I speak to 11-year-olds on a regular basis about the social distancing, about the virus. And let me tell you, they're pretty clued up. So the quicker we can get them back to school and learning for both their and getting their physical health right and their mental health right and increasing their prospects when they leave school, the better for me.
Yes, I mean, it seems to me as well that once again the scientists are sort of in disagreement about what should be done. The Labour Party are asking for people to start vaccinating teachers at half term around about the middle of February. The government are saying that their scientific advice is that there's no point in actually vaccinating teachers. What do you think?
Well, first and foremost, we've got some brilliant teachers, staff, and brilliant parents, Mike, who want the kids back at school. But, you know, at this moment in time, you mentioned the Labour Party, but I want to touch on the unions and especially the leaders of the NEU. I think they should resign and give the job to someone who really cares about our kids' future rather than their own political vendettas. It's all well and good them paying themselves a £180,000 a year salary, but what about the prospects of our children who will be lucky to earn a tenth of that in places like Ashfield? They should be ashamed and they should apologise today.
They really should. And that's what I think most parents are coming to the conclusion of. I mean, I was getting an awful lot of messages over the course of this weekend alone, partly because of a Sunday Times piece which I retweeted, about the terrible kind of toll that it's taking on individual kids. You know, I mean, I've got teenagers and you can see that they're not enjoying themselves. They're not able to see their friends. They're frustrated. They become withdrawn. You know, they sleep later and later. You know, homeschooling is no substitute for them going in. We hear this morning from the Institute for Fiscal Studies that the cost of lost schooling could be as much as £350 billion.
Absolutely right, Mike. You know, it's lost prospects as well for our children in the future. They've missed out now on probably a year's education. The quicker we get them back, the better. And like I said before, I've got 11-year-olds in Ashfield who know all the rules. They know how to keep safe, yet union officials and the Labour front bench claim the rules are confusing. And the only thing that is confusing is how these clowns are still in a job. Let's get our kids back to school.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's talk a little bit as well about the lockdown. I mean, we've heard over the weekend sort of positive noises about the summer. Matt Hancock saying that we could have a great British summer. I mean, it would seem as though at the moment we're heading in the right direction in terms of the numbers of infections going down, the numbers of hospital admissions going down. Are you sort of optimistically about, you know, what we can start doing from, say, I don't know, middle to the end of February?
Yeah, I live in hope, Mike. Now, it's always been the case since we got the vaccine that we targeting the priority groups, the people that are most at risk from dying. Now, we're actually flying through these at the moment, and we should get them all done by the middle of February, then move on to the next priority group. So then we've got no excuse, really, as a government. We've got no excuse. We need to start opening up parts of society safely to make sure we don't get another spike. But, you know, we've been promising people all along the vaccination is the way out of this pandemic. So once we've vaccinated people, We need to open up as soon as possible. It's affecting my mental health. It's affecting my missus's mental health. She's sick to death of seeing me. She wants me out of the house.
Well, this is it. I mean, with the best will in the world, and without wishing to sound unkind to anyone, people who live together need to spend some time apart. Otherwise, they go nuts.
Absolutely, Mike. It's really testing times. My wife's in the clinically vulnerable. She has to stop in a lot. I'm not down in Westminster, so there are times when we're getting on each other's nerves. We feel like we're imprisoned. We need to get out with his own network of friends, and that's been taken away. But it's important we get these vaccinations sorted. Like I say, get the priority groups done, then we've got no excuse.
Yeah, exactly right. And as far as this sort of term of Parliament is concerned, I mean, obviously there's plenty else going on. I wanted to ask you as well, Lee, about the whole business of the immigration controls. Priti Patel has been making an awful lot of noise about sorting out the people coming to this country on dinghies from across the Channel. That doesn't seem to have stopped as yet. It still seems to be going on. We saw over the weekend a fire at Napier Barracks down near Folkestone, where the asylum seekers decided upon themselves to set fire to the lodgings that they were being put in. And apparently they've now been moved. I mean, how confident are you that this is ever going to stop?
Well, I mean, the scenes, Mike, at Napier Barracks, absolutely disgraceful. You know what? If them barracks are good enough for our soldiers to live in, then surely they're good enough for people who are supposedly fleeing persecution. But the good news is, I've banged on about this before, there is new legislation coming. It's a big piece of legislation. And I spoke about this before on your show, which will see genuine asylum seekers, they will have a case. But people leaving safe countries like France, in my mind, are not genuine asylum seekers. And this new bit of legislation will see them sent straight back. And rightly so. Yes.
And I mean, hopefully that will be something that can be taken care of, because, as I say, Priti Patel talks a good game. I'd like to support what she wants to do. But until she does it, it's a bit difficult to believe what she's saying.
Well, it is difficult, but you have to realise, Mike, that the legislation that's being worked on at the moment is a massive piece of legislation, probably one of the biggest pieces of legislation that we'll see in this Parliament. And we have to make sure it's watertight. We've got, 25 years of our asylum system being abused by the lefty lawyers who have made an absolute packet out of it. We need to make sure that once it's in place, nobody can abuse it, and the people traffickers that are taking advantage of our asylum laws know straight away they're wasting the time coming here. They'll have to go somewhere else.
Absolutely. Now, I haven't been on air since the extraordinary developments on Friday night with the European Union. I mean, you were elected, Lee, back in December of 2019 on a huge wave of people in your part of the world who wanted to leave the European Union, wanted to get Brexit done. Thankfully, that's now happened. We've now left the EU, and thank God, after what they tried to do on Friday night.
Well, some people will say that the mask has slipped, but it hasn't slipped. We knew all along the EU are bully boys. They're protectionists. They will always put the EU above everybody else in the world. And Friday night, quite frankly, Mike, I was disgusted. But they backtracked pretty quickly. We stood firm, and fair play to Boris and the government. We've played a blinder with the vaccines. Just think, if we'd have stopped in the EU and we'd been part of the vaccination programme, we'd have probably vaccinated about 500,000 people by now, not the 9 or 10 million people that we're already on. So fair play to our government. It's about time somebody did actually pat Boris on the back. He's done really well on this one.
And also, doesn't it prove how ghastly these individuals are? They spend 4 or 5 years telling us about how they can't foresee any possibility of a hard border in Northern Ireland. Then they try and impose one.
Well, it's just spiteful. They've seen, we had all this project failure, all these stories that how the UK was going to fail, and we're not failing. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we lead in the world in vaccinations. We lead in the world with ordering the vaccinations, and the EU sat back looking at us and thinking, you know what, the UK they're doing okay at the moment, and what are we doing? They're doing pretty poorly, so they should, look to the UK and maybe apply to join the UK.
Well, yeah, absolutely right. And there's certainly going to be plenty of disregard for the European Commission, I believe, inside different individual European countries who are looking at what they're doing and saying, well, hang on a minute, you are now actively stopping us from getting vaccines. As I've seen, I think Germany and Italy now are ordering their own vaccines over and above what they're being granted by the EU. Well,
yeah, so much for the collectiveness of the EU, Mike. And also there's lots of unrest in France at the moment. That's going to be interesting. Elections coming up there. They're all looking at the UK and thinking, you know what, they're going alone. They seem to be doing okay. We are doing okay. What's the point of the EU? I see very little point in it at the moment.
It seems to be an extremely expensive anomaly. It doesn't seem to work very well. All it seems to do is produce an awful lot of minor bureaucrats who become incredibly powerful and who cost us a lot of money.
You're absolutely right, Mark. It's a gravy train. I've never had a problem with the UK being in the common market as such, but the political union, the gravy train, the jobs for the boys it creates, it's in my mind, it's just like watching FIFA. It's a corrupt organisation for white middle-aged men who are taking big pots of money out, big pensions, and sod everybody else.
Yeah. Talking of politicians milking the system, what did you make of that story at the weekend about Labour's shadow cabinet, who have claimed thousands of pounds in expenses since last year's lockdown, including our good friend Angela Rayner, who's apparently spent £1,600 on 23 first-class trips? I mean, I don't understand why we should be paying for her to travel first class. She spends her life calling Tory members scum. She tries to get people silenced on the backbenches. And now it turns out that she likes to travel around, but doesn't want to hang about with the hoi polloi.
Well, it's the typical champagne socialist again, Mark, isn't it? I mean, this is the Labour front bench for you. They say they are against private schools that send their children to private schools. And the Angela Rayner thing is another typical example. Look, I travel down to London on a regular basis, and let me tell you, during lockdown, you can have a carriage, a second-class carriage, whatever they call it, completely to yourself. Yeah. There's no excuse to be travelling in first class at all, and it sends the wrong message out. But hey, Angela, keep it up. It's actions like that keep people like me in a Labour area in a job.
Yeah, exactly right. Lucy Powell has thought a great idea would be to charge us for a TV licence. I don't know what her view is on people over 65 having to pay for it or go to prison, but she charges us for a TV licence.
Well, I've cancelled my TV licence. Don't pay for one. It's a complete waste of money. I'm not paying for an organisation that is quite openly anti-government and quite openly anti-British. So, I mean, Lucy can do what she wants, but mine's in the bin, and that's where it's staying. And when the bailiffs knock on my door, they'll be told to clear off.
Very wise indeed. And finally, Lisa Nandy, another one who likes to virtue signal right, left and centre. £20 for her on hand sanitizer.
Yeah, well, the only thing northern about Lisa, I think, at the moment is her accent, but everything else goes back to Islington.
Yeah, I didn't see too many people like her up in Wigan last time I was there.
No, and I think she came to Ashfield just after the elections, knocking on doors on the council estate, asking people why they voted for me instead of Labour. Right. Now, she should have probably done that before the election, or just asked me, and I told her why, because you've actually betrayed the working class in places like Ashfield. You've ignored them over Brexit, and you actually have nothing in common with them anymore.
No, exactly right. And how are the good people of Ashfield coping with the lockdown, Lee? Is a town sort of deserted? I mean, we living in London obviously don't always get the right impression of what's happening in the rest of the country. But there's an awful lot of people who want to be going back to work, who want to have a chance to make a living, who want to be able to live a relatively normal life again.
It is deserted, Mark. It's sad, but I think people in Ashfield and probably in the rest of the country are resigned to the fact now that we've got this vaccination programme in place. We've got this lockdown, hopefully our final lockdown. They can see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And when Matt Hancock's saying things like we're going to have a nice summer, that gives me hope, and it gives the people of Ashfield hope as well. Yeah,
absolutely right. Lee, great to talk to you again. When are you next back down in the house? Because it's a sort of rota basis now, is it?
Talking, because in case any of us have a mishap and we end up in hospital, we're just going to put more stress on the NHS in London. I don't want to do that. So at the moment, it's all Zoom, Teams meetings and stuff like this. But I want to get back down as soon as possible and do the job I'm paid to do.
Absolutely right. Well, great to talk to you and keep up the good work. Lee Anderson, Conservative MP for Ashfield, one of the new crop of MPs. We spotted him late last year as one of the good guys, one of the men who speaks an awful lot of common sense and who speaks from the heart and who speaks for the real working people of this country, not Angela Rayner with her £1,600 worth of first-class rail travel, not people who charge their television licence to the taxpayer, and not Lisa Nandy, who is, of course, the shadow foreign secretary, who charges us 20 quid for hand sanitizer. Don't you think you could afford that yourself, Lisa? Don't you think you could have possibly paid for it just on your own? Because that's what everybody else has to do.